Hey everyone, it's your favorite host Josh. I'm joined by Kenny, Shannon, and John. Today's episode, we have a quick Unity update, return to the office or work from home, 3D printing, and much, much more. This is Life in Cyber. Let's tech to it. Wish I had the money to just have like a new hat every episode.
You know, I thought about just putting something new like on my desk every single week, or adding something and removing something every single week.
Yeah, where's the Lubriderm?
It's in the bathroom now.
I've been adding stuff to that shelf every week, if you haven't noticed.
I did not notice.
Although
Although the Oculus logo's new.
That was new this week.
Haha! I noticed one thing. Also noticed his haircut. I'm more observant than 70% of the people in this room.
Facts.
Let's go.
All right. Tech news. So what's happening with Unity?
John, you're the one that posted this one. I thought it was hilarious.
I posted something.
What happened with the Unity CEO?
The John guy, another incident where he just got into a let's just say he was asked to spend more time with his family.
Womp womp. All right, that's tech news.
I think a lot of us kind of predicted this when we were talking about the Unity thing last week, where we were expecting, the CEO to not last long because of the backlash. We're expecting further backpedals afterward. I don't know if they've announced a new CEO yet, but I know definitely they've kind of ousted the current one. This is the same guy that was ousted from EA after setting them up for failure as well. So kind of funny to see that happen. I suspect, and I think we should probably continue watching, because I know right now they're still planning to keep some of the charging for the Unity real-time or install charging, whatever the heck they're calling it. I think they're still keeping some of that in the newer versions. I suspect that after this leadership change, we should see further backpedaling. I think this is funny. It's going to take a long time for them to win trust back. I think a lot of studios are still going to keep shifting. I just wanted to at least share that update. Like, CEO gone, he gone.
Yep, strike two for John. Sorry. We'll see if he actually gets picked up by another agency along the way. EA fired him, Unity fired him. Honestly, I mean, shame on you kind of idea,
Maybe it becomes like the fall guy. It's like you hire him just to give bad news. Let him take the brunt of the pain from it and just like, all right, goodbye.
Yeah,
he gets this nice bonus check and walks out.
That's a good call, actually.
If anyone has some extra time to look at it on the side, go look up Unreal and what changes they just made and how it relates to Unity. But that's for future news.
It's kind of what the New York Jets are for in the NFL. They send people there for them to tell them bad news, like Aaron Rodgers, you need to retire. Or, hey, Brett Favre, you need to retire.
That's valid.
Rodgers is out injured now, though, so...
I know.
Wasn't he injured on the first play?
Yes.
Yeah.
By the way, how'd that Broncos game go with the Jets?
We don't talk about that game. We don't talk about this season or last season.
I'm about ready to ask you. Do you mention anything with the Broncos in this last season? I mean,
no, we don't. We don't talk about it. We just there's Peyton Manning, and then there's like this abyss until something good happens for us again.
So Peyton Manning happened, and then just now it's sadness. We're in the sadness phase.
Yeah, it's like the 5 stages of grief. We're still in loss and grieving.
So you're waiting for the next Manning generation to come up?
Pretty much, yes.
I don't know if loss or grieving are the 5 stages of grief.
They're in there.
Are they?
I mean, it's in the name.
Technically.
It has to be one of the steps.
Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance.
Do you have that memorized, or did you look it up?
I am a very big fan of psychology, Shannon. Yes, I have that memorized.
I was gonna take a different turn with it. How much have you grieved? How much have you lost, Kenny?
Should we start this discussion, Shannon? Because I know you need help with it. Actually, no, I'm not going to turn this into the therapy podcast.
I'm surprised this. I don't know if any of this is even going to make the podcast in the last 3 minutes or 5 minutes.
Yeah, Spanish tends to cut whatever he wants to.
Depends on
I
how
don't
long
blame
the
him.
whole episode is.
Yeah,
If we
we'll
can keep
see.
this under an hour, maybe I'll just put it up.
It'll be
It's
fine.
pretty rough. It's pretty rough.
Anyway, for life, return to the office versus work from home. I know we all have different aspects of this. COVID kind of gave us the sweet love of work from home all the time. Then everyone wanted us back. I know it's different for everyone, but for the most part, I've been work from home, and the organization that I work for has been work from home ever since. We would love to return to the office. I know my CEO would love to see people in the office far more often than we currently do. The harsh reality is it's probably not going to happen. And I think sometimes we have to look at it from a personality standpoint. We're a bunch of developers. The majority of our staff are developers, and most of those guys are introverts. A lot of them would probably work out of a cave if they can get strong enough Wi-Fi signal. So I don't know. How are things with you guys? What are you guys' thoughts on those two?
I never left, so it's not a return to the office for me. It's just keep going. Even during the pandemic when the schools were closed, I was still the one on campus. So I prefer to be there. Like I work from home occasionally, like if I've got the sniffles and don't want to spread it or whatever. But I like being in the office. I'm one of the weird ones.
I think a lot of leaders are now talking about productivity paranoia, is what everyone's been coining it, and talking about that work from home employees are not actually working. That 90% of the time they're doing other activities while working from home, and I'm going to air quote this for anyone who's listening. And it's caused issues for the ones who actually are working.
I'm frustrated because I'm trying to find the article that I originally got some of these stats from, but some of the things that they were worried about are saying that people are taking meetings from bed. People are taking meetings from a different section of their house. They're not like behind their computer 100% of the time. And my counter
Toilet.
argument
You can
was
say
like, yeah, and on the toilet too. I was like, when you're in the office, you're not behind your desk 100% of the time either. It depends,
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine, on the job. As a manager, I would imagine you're behind the desk more than most would be, or a librarian, something like that. But when I worked out of the office, I was up and about helping people. People barged into my office all of the time. So I felt like I wasn't actually getting work done. Now it's at the point where I have to remind myself to take a break and get up and leave. Otherwise, I just don't.
And I really think there's a lot of mixed stories here. So some of us work. I work in a Fortune 500 company. I know some of you work in some smaller organizations, nonprofit, education, right? We're all across the board. And at least from my point of view, the way that my leadership has always framed it as we're more productive together. We're always more innovative together. And that when we're at home, we don't always get the water cooler talk. We don't always get the breakout sessions where we can just lock ourselves in a room with a whiteboard and just noodle an idea. How do you guys feel about innovation when it comes to your organizations, and is it hindered by work from home?
I think it's a culture shift. I can see that side of it where you can lock people into a room to brainstorm, but at the same time, why can't you all join a joint team session and brainstorm that way? You may have to have your camera on, which a lot of us nerds hate having our cameras on, but in order to get a true brainstorming session, you might need to see people's facial responses to ideas, or, have someone with a whiteboard in the background, or I think there's an add-on with Teams now to where you can actually draw out ideas. So it's just a matter of getting people educated on it and doing it.
Right. Using things like Jamboard or other things, right? Like whiteboarding online.
In my experience, it's been very like personality dependent, right? So I'm definitely a brainstorm on a whiteboard kind of person. I definitely like having groups in a room. Like that helps me because I kind of feed off the energy of like the collective, right? I look at like people's body language and that helps me like think better, right? Because I can see how someone reacts or responds to like their immediate response to an idea, not their thought out one, right? So I get to see like, does somebody flinch, or does somebody, do they make a specific look with their eyes or whatever that shows they're intrigued or whatever it is. Like I like reading people's body language, so that helps a lot when I'm brainstorming or thinking. And I've seen this work pretty well in Teams or Zoom or whatever with certain people, but I've also seen it be a complete disaster with certain people where they don't feel comfortable speaking up. They're staring at another monitor, distracted. They're working on something else entirely, and they're just in the meeting. Or they've got their camera turned off, and who knows where they are, right? There's a lot of those that I see where people are just disengaged or less engaged, and that's why I like the in-person stuff, because you can kind of like force that, and I guess like force might be the wrong word, but you kind of encourage it in a way where you're not necessarily calling someone out, because everyone, when they're suddenly in that social environment, like suddenly they feel that just innate like pressure of just like, all right, let's pay attention. Whereas like on a Zoom call where there's a lot of distractions and potential to like alt tab out or have a second monitor or whatever it may be. I mean, we even see it here sometimes when we're casting, right? Like some of us are looking up articles on the other thing, or checking a message from the wife or whatever it is, right? Like I think that like collaborating in the room physically removes distractions and increases focus, and so you tend to come up with better ideas most of the time. This isn't always true. I think it's very dependent on the person, but that's what I see a lot of the time.
Yeah, can I get a number one with cheese, and I'll take a Coke. Oh wait, sorry, was I not muted? It's you see that all the time.
I agree. I'm definitely more distracted when doing meetings here. I don't know how many meetings I'm also working on something else on a different screen. And then I'm called upon and I'm like, what was the last thing he said? Oh. And I think, yeah, when you collaborate in the office or just around each other, I think things just have a tendency to flow quicker too, because of the less distractions. And to go back just a little bit more from our conversation, there are times as well, I've caught myself doing this, where I'm working from home and then, I walk into the kitchen, grab a snack, and then I'm like, oh crap, there's dishes. And I'll go in there and I'll wash some dishes and I'll try to make up that time later. If not, I'll throw in an hour of PTO on that day. But how many people have that level of integrity to also do that? And I think that's the big question mark that a lot of executives have, is how many of those people are getting distracted with yard work or home chores and continuing to book time against, work when they're not actually working.
Well, let me play devil's advocate on that one. Like, I think a lot of people are trying to challenge the concept of work should not be based on hours. It should be based on, production. It should be based on, are you hitting targets, right? Thinking of it more as like a project management, like milestone perspective, instead of based on like time put in, right? Because I think we all know, like research shows a lot that like time does not equal effort, time does not equal results. Time is time, and a lot of the time, like different people use that time differently. Like in an 8 hour day, pre all of this hybrid remote work conversations were even happening, they were saying like you could only expect maybe 3 hours of actual productivity during an 8 hour day from a normal person, like most of the time. So I would say like work from home is probably better from an individual production perspective. Like if you are left with focus time and you're at home with that focus time and you're just actually using that focus time, like you don't have as many interruptions, you don't have, all sorts of, there's all sorts of reasons why that's better for some situations. And there are times like in my case, if I have to write, like if I'm writing a proposal or writing a report, like I gave a 50-page dossier on another college last year, like I have to like remove myself from those interruptions, and then work from home is good for me for writing because I can do that focus time. I just can't do it for long periods of time. I can do it to accomplish a task and then I've got to go do something. But I don't know. It depends. Again, it kind of comes down to the personalities. Like, but I do think it kind of takes away from the teamwork, the collaboration, the camaraderie that comes with that. Like the trust in your team sometimes deteriorates from not being able to like be around each other and get to know each other better. So I don't know. I'm on the fence on it. I see both sides of the story. For me personally,
Mm-hmm.
I like to be in the office.
So if you take it to the next level, and you just kind of hit the nail on the head when you were talking about being around other employees on the team. What about bringing in new employees? We have been with our organizations for many years. All of us have. Now, what about bringing in the new guy? The new guy that knows nothing about your company, nothing about what he's doing on the day-to-day basis. How are you going to bring them up to speed if they're always work from home and they've never seen a member of their team ever?
I've tried that before. Onboarding sucks remotely. It is really hard. I mean, granted, like you could probably develop better processes for it, but it is difficult.
It is definitely more difficult. I ended up doing a lot of working meetings where we just connect and we just work through things together. That's the closest that I've come to simulating, onboarding someone new on my team.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've always had an issue with work from home is I got into this time frame where my whole calendar was just covered in meetings. there was no time for anything but a meeting because nobody understood about how to make a 5 or a 10-minute meeting. It was always 30 minutes or an hour. And next thing I know, my calendar was double and triple booked, and I didn't know what to go to. I didn't know where to go. And as a manager, what are you going to do then? Exactly what Josh did. You're going to start working while you're on another call. And then when your name gets called out, you're like, I'm sorry, I was working on something else. What was that? You're going to get called out on that. And so is that really worth everybody's time at that state?
Well, how many useless meetings are there? If they call you out on that and you actually don't need to be in that meeting or you weren't needed, you can say, I don't know why I was requested on this meeting. You made me double book myself. So I was trying to do two things at once. Can you be more considerate of my time next time when you go to schedule a meeting with me?
Are you trying to say that somebody looks at your calendar before sending you a meeting invite?
No, I'm just saying that they do it.
I'm going to challenge that too, Shannon. Like, I think there have been times that I've said that I've had a lot of meetings. Like, there are days that I have 8 to 9 hours of back-to-back meetings sometimes right now. And every time that I talk about that, everybody comes back and they're like, well, why? How many of those are useless? I'm like, none of them, actually. All of them are productive. Like, all of the meetings that I go to are usually good. There are very few that aren't. And I think it really just comes down to like kind of what John is saying as far as like those segments. Like, what you're missing out is the opportunity to like ask a quick question or to like talk something out really fast. Like that you can do that in the office where you just walk up to somebody and be like, "Hey, help me think this through in a couple minutes." And it doesn't have to be so structured, but with work from home, everything has to be so structured. And so to John's point, like everyone just throws up whatever the default view is in Outlook, which is 30 minutes. And so they think the smallest meeting window is 30 minutes when in reality the conversation can really only take 5 or 10, but then people end up double booked or whatever it may be, right? Whereas in real time and in office, somebody can just see, oh, somebody's talking to you, I'll be right back, I'll come stop by later. It's a lot less structured and it's a lot less like formulaic, I guess. And as a person that prefers less structured types of environments, I like to just kind of do things. I don't know. It's a little weird living and breathing off the calendar, and I find it exhausting.
So I may be an outlier here, but in those types of situations, I'll just try and call you first. Do you have 5 minutes? Yes or no? If yes, then I proceed. If no, then I say, okay, can you call me back when you have 5 minutes? I don't see the need in bringing up a calendar and bringing the calendar into it. Or
I
I'll
hate
just
calls.
exactly. Or I'll message you. So, that's my mindset. I will call the person. They'll be like, oh, I hate calls. And I'll say, well, shut up. Otherwise, this is going to be an hour-long meeting.
Yeah, and I'll say too, like again, it kind of comes down to personality, right? Like, I get frustrated sometimes when someone sends me a message saying, "Hey, are you available right now?" And then I'll see the message in like an hour, and I'll be like, "No, sorry, I was in a meeting." And then they don't respond to me for like 3 days, and like, "Hey, by the way, I needed you for this, blah blah blah. Can you answer the question right now?" I'm like, "No, I'm in the meeting right now." Like, and then there's just always this, "Are you ready? Are you available right now?" all the time, and I'm like, "No, like take the second to look at like the calendar. It's not hard." Yeah,
Yeah.
it's weird.
Yeah, and
I
I
send
think the
I send a chat message and then I try a phone call. If that doesn't work, I send an email. My last resort is to schedule a damn meeting.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's different about most companies is, like Kenny said, it's the 30-minute meetings. Everyone doesn't check that. They just push that out there. And the next thing I know, I had the same scenario today. I had one of my employees reach to me saying, hey, when you get done with that meeting, can you come talk to me? And I was like, I'm not in a meeting. But then I looked at my calendar. I'm like, oh, that meeting they scheduled that took 8 minutes was an hour-long meeting. They thought I was in a meeting, so they didn't even come by the office to see if I was sitting there. And so I think that's an issue with just work by general is the meeting paralysis. Like everyone's trying to go off a calendar versus I think that we need to start changing the mindset of how we do day-to-day business.
And one of the things that I hate the most is like with Teams specifically, with it being linked to your calendar, it will be like, oh, hey, Shannon's busy right now. Don't message him. When in reality, it's just red because I wanted it to look red.
Well, or it was exactly that, right? You had a meeting invite or you put some time aside for yourself to say, hey, this is my focus time. You might put something on the calendar, right? And I do the same thing. But the problem with that is now nobody bugs me, whether or not, I'm like, no, I'm still available. I just, I don't want someone to overbook this spot on the calendar, even though they're not going to look anyway and do it anyway. So what I wanted to bring up was Meta. So the Zuck, in his all infinite wisdom, remember back in COVID, and he was over here saying we're going to work from home, right? And he decided to say 100% of his people are working from home now. We're never coming back to the office. The Zuck said this. And not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, he actually just paid, what was it, $160 million to get out of a lease for a building he never even had a person in. And now, all of a sudden, he just changed his mind. And now he's talking about, hey, Meta now it wants you in the office 3 days a week, right? He's doing an RTO policy, return to office. And now you have to be there 3 days a week, even if you were hired out of Louisiana and the nearest office is 3 states away. How do you handle these kind of scenarios then for the companies that hired you as a remote worker and now is mandating a return to office?
I think that's a
What
recipe
choice
for
did he give
turnover.
him?
What do you say, Shannon? Sorry.
What choice did he give him? I move to the closest area or find a
Or lose your job?
way to cope. Yeah. I mean, was there any information on that? I didn't see the article.
Yeah, so Business Insider wrote the first article that I read about this, and it's exactly that: is failure to do so can lead up to, but not excluding termination. I think is the way it was worded.
It's a very interesting way to do layoffs.
I think it's that's a good point. It's the self-disqualifying type of layoff, right? It's the do you want to relocate? Yes, no. All right, bye. I think that's one way to do that. I think it's a recipe for turnover, and it's manufactured turnover, right? It could be layoffs. It could be that they specifically want to move into target locations. And this is actually a part of RTO and work from home that I kind of wanted to bring up, which is kind of the economic impact, right? Like this was one of the things that I wasn't, that kind of turned me off, at least as far as like my city goes, right? I work in Denver, and what I saw was a lot of people in like working for us that switched to remote. They moved out of the state, but they were getting paid Denver salaries, right? So they were taking that Denver salary and taking it to Montana or taking it to Louisiana or whatever it may be. I don't actually know. I'm throwing random states out. But what they're doing is taking that money away from the Denver economy. And so then Denver's economy started to tank. And what we saw was a lot of homelessness rise. We saw a lot of issues with housing. We saw a lot of issues with businesses closing. And in fact, businesses are still closing every day. And what you're seeing is kind of that money leave the location and move to other locations. So what would normally be an employer providing an economic boost to a location by hiring people, they're now providing that boost to a different community that they're not a part of, that they don't get to choose. So to me, it's taking away from the social like and civic duty of the business to that location, right? There's a reason why they get things like tax breaks and stuff from governments, or governments fight for like big companies to move in. It's because it provides an economic boost to their location, to their region. And now that economic boost is going elsewhere and they have no control over that. I could see why a lot of companies or even governments would be against that.
That's extremely valid because we've had that same situation where, my company's in New York. And so we're having people making New York money and going to Wyoming. We had a guy move to Wyoming and kind of surprised us. I think the only time we found out is because he needed to, make a modification to his healthcare. And we're like, wait, whoa, where you went to Wyoming? We've had guys to move to North Carolina, move to Washington, California, which that maybe not be a savings for them, but yeah, we've had plenty of people move out of state, and they kind of gave themselves a raise in a sense, but then you have, like you said, that economic factor. It's like, well, now you're there. And I think we've seen that with some other companies. I know companies like Google and I believe Facebook as well try to adjust salaries because it's like, hey, we were paying you for California and the rate that you go for here, not the rate you go for in Montana or Mississippi.
Well, and I think it complicates things like tax law as well, right? Like, let's say you're a company that's highly focused on one specific state, and then all of a sudden you do this work from home thing, and you've got employees moving to other states, and you're not prepared for that. Now all of a sudden your administration, your HR, your finance people now have to go learn how taxes work in all these other states and try to figure out how to process all of that. And then you may even be responsible for different healthcare situations based on which state or even which country they're in. Like we've got an employee that I know of that lives in Italy. Like there's all kinds of issues with that, I think. And the question is your company willing to take on all of that overhead to provide that as a benefit? And not all of them are. Like, a lot of people are looking at this as like, this is a real estate, like they're losing their real estate investment and that's their problem. It's like, actually, it's a lot more complicated than that. It really is.
And do you guys really think it's fair for an employer to decide what to pay you depending on where you live? If they're going to allow you to work from home, if they say, yes, you can work from remote, period, location remote, doesn't matter where you live. Like, and should your pay change based off of where you're physically located?
I don't think it does. I think they're paying you to do a job. You accept that rate, and that should be the end of it.
Yeah, I don't think it should. However, just like any goods sold, you have a market rate. The price of fish on a coastal state might be far cheaper than it is to get that fresh enough to make it to Colorado. It's going to cost more money for that. So in that case, you guys may pay an extra $1 a pound for tilapia or whatever it might be. And that's maybe a terrible example, but I think there is some valid point in there of, there is a market rate for an individual or any product or service, depending on where you are.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with Shannon on this one. I do think that they should pay based on cost of living. And the reason why I think that is, if you look at the market rate, so going into kind of what Josh is saying, like, I do a lot of market research whenever I'm posting a position. So I look at Glassdoor, etc. And I'm trying to figure out, like, what is the going rate for a city that has a similar cost of living to Denver, right? So I'll compare it to like New York or not quite San Francisco or Los Angeles. But, Denver's not a cheap city to live in. And no, I don't like break it down into like, okay, well, what if they live in like Lakewood or Aurora? I was like, okay, it's not good. We don't need to get that specific. Let's just focus on where the location of the company is, and if they choose to commute, that's on them, right? But at the end of the day, like, yeah, I do think that that's valid in the sense of like, you're now focusing on like, is that equitable for the other people in that position, right? So you're talking about equality versus equity at this point. Let's say you hire a system administrator at 90K in one location, and and another person that has the same job is living in a much cheaper location. Let's say they're in like El Paso, Texas versus Denver, Colorado. Like, the person in El Paso, Texas, that money now goes further than the person in Denver, Colorado, both doing the same job. That's the equivalent of the person in Denver getting paid less, right? That is the difference between equality versus equity. Equity would either raise the person in Denver's pay to make it equivalent to the person in El Paso, or decrease the person in El Paso to make it equivalent to the person in Denver. I don't care which decision you make, as long as it's equitable.
I kind of want to throw another wrench into that scenario. There's a lot of New York companies, I'm throwing a New York one out there, that are looking for extra talent. And now that they can hire remotely, they hire less than what they would pay, but more than what I can get paid out of Wyoming. How do you feel about that?
So that's where they're kind of like undercutting, but also paying higher. Like, I think they're taking advantage of a market gap, right?
Exactly.
Do I think it's right or wrong? I think if I'm a capitalist, I'll say, yeah, good on them for being smart. But as far as like equity goes, it depends. Are they hiring people that are in New York and they're hiring people that are in Wyoming? Like, are they paying them different, or are they paying them the same? Like, again, it comes down to that equity conversation. But that it is, I would say that is kind of taking away from employers in Wyoming, right? Because then if you've got actual bodies and they need people physically in Wyoming to work, but then they're said, well, you can work from home and you can make not quite New York money, but you can make North Carolina money. Why wouldn't they?
Right, it's happened all across the country, and this is one of the reasons why inflation is such a bad problem right now across the country, and it's something that we've seen here in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and I had to give a 27% raise to my employees to adjust their market share, and it wasn't because of anything other than they were leaving for remote jobs. That's all it was. They were leaving me for remote jobs, and I don't have the talent pool here in Wyoming to backfill them. So either I have to bring in another remote worker myself, which my company doesn't believe in remote work. We work better together kind of idea, or I need to find a way to pay this guy more. But it's a double-edged sword. As soon as we start paying them more, everything goes up. Our housing market here has almost doubled in the last 3 years. It's almost expensive to buy a house in Cheyenne, Wyoming as it is in Denver, Colorado now, and that's starting to get ridiculous. We don't have the economy to support this.
The world is starting to feel the pain of what hospitals have had to deal with traveling nurses for I don't know how many past years.
That's a good point, Shannon. Like, and just to clarify for anybody not aware of how that works, traveling nurses make how much compared to a regular nurse, Shannon?
triple, sometimes quadruple.
Yeah, it's a lot. And that's the
And
thing is like as wages go up, like some cities and locations can't deal with that, right? Like this is something that I was actually predicting, and this is me kind of scaling out on like a macro level over the course of like decades, but I was predicting kind of human migrations. So like right now we're at this point where people are kind of abandoning cities and moving into smaller locations because they can take higher wages and have lower expenses. I was like, but the problem is those economies in those like smaller locations are going to crumble under that, and we're going to start seeing migrations back into more cities and stuff. And so we're going to start seeing a lot more ghost towns. We're going to start seeing a lot of like kind of like mega structures, like what you see in China, where they've got like huge housing structures for like hundreds and hundreds of people. And this is again, I'm talking like maybe a century down the road, but we're seeing that we're seeing economies crumble in smaller cities. We're seeing economies like struggle in the short term in big cities. But I think that they're going to end up having to move back to the big cities where they have the ability to deal with this kind of fluctuation. And eventually, that combined with like demographic cliffs, like you're going to start seeing birth rates decline in some of those smaller locations, like all sorts of things. I think we're going to start seeing like some crazy human migrations over the next 100 years. It's going to be interesting. I might have taken this conversation too far, but I'm a little futuristic on the thought.
Well, yeah, and if we pull that back a little bit, I think what I'm starting to see more and more are the companies they're presenting their positions as remote. But if you look at the job market, they're like remote, but you must live within 50 miles of New York City.
Bingo. Why do you think that is, John?
Let me just rewind the podcast for everybody and let you listen to it all over again. Because exactly that. It's exactly what you're predicting. And we're starting to see it in the job market and on the day to day. Now, it's kind of one of those double-edged swords when I start looking at it, because now they're like, okay, you can work for us remotely, but you have to be within X miles of a facility. And I do have some employees that live in Florida. I have some employees that live all over the place. But the reason for it is because they are within commuting distance of a facility. It's the only way that we allow it as a company. Does that still then fight the battle of having too many Zoom meetings or too many Google Meet meetings or whatever platform you decide to use? It doesn't fix it. But I think we're starting to see a trend where the work from home, the remote jobs are now being, hey, let's come back to office, or at least let's pull in some of the leash that we gave out there, right? We gave too much too fast. And you're starting to see people like what Josh was saying. Hey, you moved to a different state? That's not, legal. Like I gotta fix the tax bracket. I've got to fix your health care. I've got to fix this stuff. Oh, and by the way, we're not even a company in the state of Wyoming. So now we've got to go figure out how to become a legal entity in the state of Wyoming. And I've been seeing a lot more companies now just say, you know what, if you don't live in these states, you can't work for us.
It's a ton of overhead. We've had that. We've had a situation, I think Washington State might have been the state, where if you have one employee working in there remotely, it's like, yeah, whatever. But as soon as you have that second, you got to establish yourself as a corporation within the state. There's a bunch of overhead that comes with that.
In my head, I've kind of associated, I don't know if you guys could view it this way too, but manufacturers outsourcing labor to different countries. Like with what you were saying, Kenny, with someone taking their Denver pay and then moving to somewhere like Podunk, Pueblo, and living the king's life down in Pueblo. Isn't that what big corporations are basically doing anyway by outsourcing work to different countries?
Yep, 100%.
So why are they getting mad at, Shannon? Why are they getting mad at Shannon for taking rich kid money and living the best life off of it?
Well, and I think this comes down to just like how does capitalism work as a whole, right? If you're the one providing the jobs for the area, right, that's where you're injecting that money, right? And so I do say that the government does not like it when you outsource jobs to another country. They're not a fan of it, right? There's a reason why there's a lot of incentives to bring things back in. Like you're seeing that with semiconductor market right now. There's a lot of different times where the government will say, no, we need to bring that back in house. Like we need to inject jobs into our market. But the reason why the government doesn't always push back on that is because there's a specific point in I'm going to go to unemployment. There's a specific point where the unemployment rate cannot be close to zero, too close to zero, because then there's nobody to fill the jobs that are needed. There's nobody like then the housing markets are gosh, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but there's an issue with inflation, whereas like the unemployment rate approaches zero, the cost of living gets out of control. And there's no way that the government can make adjustments using like interest rates that are easily where they can easily fine tune the economy without having that unemployment rate be higher, so to speak. So like what we're talking about with inflation kind of across the board, the best way that we can kind of adjust that is by increasing the unemployment rate slowly. And it's one of those where they kind of need to make sure that there's more jobs or that there's more people than there are jobs. And so that's why that's okay where it can be outsourced occasionally. But we're at that point now where, you know, that has kind of tipped too far to that scale and we need to bring those things back in. However, going back into that demographic cliff idea, like we're not making enough babies to fill these jobs over the next few decades, right? And so there's a lot of risk involved there. And yeah, I hate to say it, like unemployment rate can't be zero. As much as everybody needs to make a living, like it does kind of, you know, our economy's not really built for that.
I mean, I did my part. I had kids. You'd seen the little demons that I have running around this house. Spanish had enough for like 10 families.
Exactly. I'm doing my part. The rest of you need to do the same.
Thanks for having enough kids so I don't have to.
Right? It's like if we take it back to
Kenny.
episode 1, we talked about artificial intelligence and how it's going to change the economy. And I think this is another aspect of the work from home is just another aspect we're going to be like, okay, well, how do we fill these jobs when we don't have people to do so? We're going to find ways. It's just, how do we get there? It's going to take time. And so I love talking about this, and then our return to home return to office and work from home, and maybe a hybrid, you know, settling of somewhere in the middle, right? Because all of us love our focus time, and some of us want to have the water cooler talks. I'm actually one of the hybrid guys. I think hybrid is the best schedule. I think Tuesday through Thursday I should be in the office, and Monday through Friday I might be in the office, I might not. And if I have my hours in, I might take Friday off. You know, that's the thing, is like I'm hired for a job, not really for anything else. But that depends on who we're talking to. We're talking about salary right now, right? And if we talked about salary employees, they have different rules than an hourly employee.
I think John just made up some new days.
Did I?
Tuesday through Thursday, you're in the office, but Monday through Friday, you're out of the office. So I don't really know what days you're working.
I wanted an escape clause, guys. We all work in IT. It's not, it will work, it should work. You know, everyone needs to learn this vernacular.
You have to have overlapping logic to have bugs in your code, Shannon. And if without bugs in the code, then we don't have a job after we release the product.
I don't do software. I'll click the next button and accept the terms of use, but I don't debug or compile.
Yeah, until it breaks your email server and you're dealing all day with that. So, you know.
No, that was Microsoft's fault. I had nothing to do with it, and fuck Microsoft.
Patching them, okay? You know, I should patch up to the newest and latest and greatest. Not always, guys.
We patched it, but we didn't test.
Speaking of latest and greatest, one of the newest, not really new anymore. God, it's been out for a while. One of the greatest technologies, I think, in the last decade is 3D printing. I think the possibilities are truly endless. There's a lot of things, a lot of industries, a lot of people will benefit over time. I've seen 3D printed homes, 3D printed body parts. The NBA had, I think, Wilson, if I'm getting the company right, 3D print a ball that never has to be inflated. It's pretty amazing what can be done with 3D printing. And I know John and Kenny both have 3D printers. Kenny's mentioned it before on a podcast on what he likes to do in his spare time. But yeah, I think that's one of those big things that even though we're kind of using it more as a toy, in a sense, as techies, has a lot of applications that could really benefit the human race.
I use it as a toy because I'm a hobbyist and I'm a dork, right? I like to print little figures and paint them because I think it's fun. But at work, and actually I was just doing this earlier today. I was taking some of my new students and touring them through our facility. I work for an engineering school, right? So mechanical engineering has a huge additive manufacturing like a group, and that's the official term for 3D printing, additive manufacturing instead of subtractive. But we've got a fleet. We've got an entire fleet of Prusa printers. We've got a giant metal printer that we use to print parts for military operations or for NASA. Like we print like brackets for satellites. It's nothing dramatic. But you know, we've got a big aluminum printer. We had a liquid crystal elastomer printer for a while, and I think we sold that recently. But we've done some pretty cool stuff, man, and it's really interesting. I find the whole thing fascinating. I also have some groups in bioengineering who do exactly what you were talking about, Josh. I've been over there and seen some of the research labs. It's like a regular 3D printer, but with syringes, and they're printing like tendons and ears and tissues and all of these things that I want to stay far away from because it grosses me out. Like, no, thank you. I'll stick to plastic. But
Hmm.
the
I
whole
want
thing
to
is
touch it.
fascinating.
Yeah, and I think like I love that. I love the medical aspect of it actually, because now we're able to take cells from your own body and infuse them into 3D prints, so your body doesn't reject something. Right? We
Pieces
can
of
make
me.
stents. Right. And to be honest, I'd rather it be that way. This week, they're starting to print vegan meat, right, through 3D printing. And I think it's kind of a cool idea as much as a lot of us kind of smirk at that, Josh, I saw that, is it's just think about the idea of world hunger as it is today. And if we could take raw ingredients and print more food versus grow new food, it may be a solution that can help some of us. No, I'm not saying it's going to be for all of us and for everything. I'm not taking us to the Matrix where we're all going to start eat slop or whatever they call that in the movie. It's going to be something that we can use more. I think one of the coolest things that I saw that the Cheyenne Hospital actually just got is my kid's friend broke his wrist while playing football. He went in, got an X-ray, and they 3D printed him a personalized cast. It was a removable cast that he can wear on a 3D printer, and it took him like 3 hours to print. He was able to just, wait for it, put it on him, and off to the races he went. And I thought that was the coolest use of 3D technology.
I've seen those. So much cooler than the old-fashioned cast.
You know what's even neater is I actually have 2 3D printed things in my mouth right now. Like, my dentist 3D prints custom teeth for people. Like, so when I was a kid, we didn't have dental insurance, and they put like these giant metal crowns that didn't fit in my mouth, and they used concrete and a hammer to chisel it in, and it messed up my mouth. But that's what I had for like 25 years because I didn't have the insurance to go back until long after I had like made it in my career, gotten a real person job for once and figured out what a dentist is. But they ended up pulling that stuff out. I had like little stubs of teeth left, and then they did like 3D scans, and then they were able to like design teeth that would fit my mouth better because the back 25 years ago, the little metal crowns that they put in there were one size fits all. It was not like custom tailored, and so like all of this stuff being bunched up and all my teeth being crooked when I was younger was just because of that. It had nothing to do with my genetics. Like, I haven't worn braces. My teeth are okay. They're not perfect, but they're great. And knowing that they were able to 3D scan that and then go and literally 3D print porcelain ones. So now they're white, they're not silver. I can smile and not be self-conscious, and they're custom designed for my mouth. Like, that's something that they did for me like 7-8 years ago. Like, this isn't even that new. It's just something people don't talk about.
They've actually been 3D printing skin as well for the past several years as far as healthcare technology. They're really starting to look at it as a way to print new organs. They're able to reproduce like on a small scale. They could print like a micro liver and like a small kidney, things like that, small hearts, but they can't, the amount of DNA and I'm not really good enough to talk about this, but the amount of organisms and goo that they would need to put in a petri dish to inject things together out of their syringes, they don't have enough of it yet.
Right, and they're starting to learn. They're starting to learn how to use RNA sequencing to actually grow the actual organ itself by presenting a seed. Was what you're basically saying, right? Is like that's what they used to call it. Is like I can present you a seed of a liver, and liver is one of the few organs in our body that actually can grow, and
Right.
they can just get it to start, and in a month you've got a replaceable liver. And for people who are sitting on dialysis or something for kidneys or whatever it may be, it's been able to bring people back, give them life again. And I like to go back to the 3D printed homes. And actually, that's something that they're using a lot. I don't know if anyone's been reading about China, but China actually does this now on a normal basis. They actually print the homes rather than build the homes because the material is cheaper, it's easier to find. China is one of those places where they have a lot of people, so wood is hard to come by. So they're printing concrete homes. And literally, these homes are being printed in 72 hours, and people are moving in. It's really crazy if you've been reading about it. And something else I'd like to read about is like I like to keep up with space travel. It's just part of my job. It's just something that fascinates me at the same time. And everyone's been talking about space, like going to Mars or going to the moon. And NASA's now just saying, well, why do we need to send everything? Why can't we send a printer? Why can't we send, a way to print a habitat? And I think it was Japan actually who's talking about doing the first one to the moon. And we're going to probably see that here in the next couple years. And I would love to see this as a society, right? To see how do we build that, and maybe that's how we're going to have space travel. It's kind of expensive still to leave our atmosphere.
Terraforming, so to speak. Like in the movies, terraforming is always this destructive thing, but it could just be additive, right? And I think this comes down to like how we think about manufacturing. So kind of going back to the concept of what additive manufacturing is, like to kind of explain the difference, right? Like a lot of what we do for manufacturing is subtractive, meaning we take a big hunk of metal or ore and we use machining equipment like lathes or whatever to like carve out what we need from that in precision. And it's very effective. It's very like it's largely inexpensive to like do the manufacturing. The downside is there's a lot of wasted material that they then can like they've done a lot of like recycling and stuff. So it's fairly efficient now. But additive manufacturing, you don't have to have that big block. You start with something that already, let's go into like FDM. It's like a piece of flat plastic that goes through a hot nozzle, and then you kind of build something from that. You can get structures from additive that you can't get from subtractive, right? You can get like lattice structures that you use for like support material inside of a piece of equipment, right? Like a steel beam, with subtractive, we can make that solid steel beam. But with additive, that steel beam on the inside could be a lattice structure. And actually, when you do like tension testing on that, they're actually stronger than the solid metal itself, and they last longer, right? One of our researchers at CU Denver, and if you guys want to look up this company, it's Impressio. They have a partnership with the NFL, and they're using these types of like liquid crystal elastomers to 3D print like helmets that are better at athletics than what the type of padding that we have now. And we had a Smash Lab. This company like no longer is like housed in CU Denver. They've succeeded and moved on and have their own facility now, which is great. But the Smash Lab, they were literally taking helmets and just putting their material in and then smashing them with a piston at like 300 miles an hour. It's great to watch. But they're now taking that into like military contracts and stuff. So there's a lot of ways to apply this technology and see the different ways where like those structures can either absorb more impact, have more tensile strength, like last longer, be more durable because the manufacturing method is different.
When do you think we'll actually start seeing 3D printers in everybody's home?
2 years, 5 years. Really, I think it comes down to like how easy is it. Right now, there's a lot of like tweaking and testing. It's good for people who like to tinker. Right now, there's a lot of repairs that have to take into place. Like I think it's a little too complicated for the average person now, especially because like you have to design your own parts or you have to find the right STL models and you have to do a slicer and all of that. I think no, 2 years, 5 years. I'm joking. It's going to be like that for techies. But I think as far as like when is my grandma going to be able to 3D print something akin to how she was like printing things on paper when that first happened? Like, we might be a decade or two out from that one.
Well, you're saying that my mom's not going to have a 3D printer sitting next to her. I don't know what they call it, the crickets now, the cutters, right? And it's kind of interesting to see, like for hobbyists as long as with other things. And that's what I keep coming back to is like the food side. I don't know if you guys have seen the pancake machine, the pancake bot. That one's always fun, right? You can print yourself a pancake with a design and stuff like that. And it's a 3D printer, same idea.
How thick is that pancake, though?
How thick do you want it?
It depends on the nozzle size. So
I mean, from the video that I saw, it was more like a pancake. It was more like a crepe, really. It was thin. I wouldn't fit.
I've seen the cake ones. I've seen the pancake ones. I've seen the chocolate ones, and a lot of them are gimmicks. But it's really just trying to show off the technology, I think, more than anything. But in the future, I have a feeling, say what?
Give me some of that cake.
Well, the big thing that I know that a lot of us have been talking about in the manufacturing facilities is having a 3D printer available that can print multiple different types of materials, not just plastic, not just metal, aluminum, whatever it may be. So that way, when you need to buy parts for your printers or replacements for anything in your home, you're able just to click print on your printer. You'll pay 50 cents for the STL, the model, right? And they'll let you print it, or you can make a claim to the company who's manufacturing, and they'll send you the model, through your system, and then it will just print it versus you having to wait for it. I mean, that's, I think, faster, and then less things that people have to hold on to warehouses, right?
I really think we need to make like bigger software improvements, right? Like going from that like model to slicer to print, like that middle step of slicing needs to go away. It needs to be automated, and it needs to be invisible to the user. Like, because like creating like supports, and doing all the configuration for the printers, like right now, yeah, that's not standardized. Every printer is a little different, and you're gonna have to tweak it based on your climate, your environment, etc. That level of complexity is the part that we need to remove for the average person to feel comfortable with it.
It needs to be as easy as printing a Word doc.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's when we're going to need more standards. STL has been standardized, right? The splicing, the only reason why it hasn't been standardized is my printer here is different than your printer, right, Kenny?
Right.
Like, it'd be different nozzles, could be different speeds, different capabilities. Hell, maybe the different type of filament that I use inside the printer might need different settings. With that said, if we can standardize it and make it to the point where just like toner or like image transfer, basically, then we can take that middle step out, right?
We need the UK to step in and tell the printing organizations to standardize the ports,
Shannon,
the filament,
we
and the
talked
size.
about this. The UK is not in the EU.
Same thing.
Yeah, we
They're
got an
frowned
EU
upon.
coming down on us now.
Brexit never happened.
So, someone needs to send Shannon a letter through podcast@lifeandcyber.com to tell him why the UK is not the EU.
Yeah, explain it to me like I'm 5, because really they're all just crammed together.
Shannon, what do you think is the better country in the UK? Like what do you think consists of the UK? Now that you know that the EU is different, what exists? Like who all is in the United Kingdom?
Well, the Queen died,
Uh-huh.
so her son.
I think her husband.
Talking
So
about
Queen
Charles.
Elizabeth. Yeah.
Yes.
So like what countries are in the United Kingdom?
Hell if I
Well,
know.
we
I
don't
didn't
even
go
get off
that
the
far.
continent. Don't even get off the continent. Stay on the continent. What countries are in the UK?
Britain. Something.
Okay. I think Great Britain is more than one country too, actually.
Scotland doesn't exist, guys. I'm sorry. Wales doesn't exist.
I'm a typical American.
By the way, this was a setup just to piss off anybody in the UK that listens, because I know that they don't get along in the UK very well at all.
Can you please call us bloody winkers and stupid Americans, and we can move on from this? It's fine.
I am jealous of how they can speak. Fuckers and twats, and I wish I could just go down the road here and do that, but apparently it's not proper.
Why bloody hell not?
I think that wraps up
Ain't
another
it?
episode of Life in Cyber. Thanks to all our listeners for tuning in. Remember, if you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe and share with your tech friends. Don't forget to drop your questions and thoughts at podcast@lifeandcyber.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay secure, find your equilibrium. This is Life in Cyber. Sign off.
Complaints
Chip,
are
chip.
welcome too.
See you guys later.